Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm a co-founder of Build with Robots with Chris Ziomek, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer. And Build with Robots was formed really from an idea that came from Chris Ziomek, and that his last company called Zetech was purchased by Teradyne. And Teradyne started buying robotics companies, and he's really thought, and I think we witness this all the time as New Mexico entrepreneurs, is that rather than focusing on the technology, let's focus on the solution set. And he asked me to join him with this. And so we actually had an agreement with one of the largest paint suppliers in the country in terms of being able to build a painting robot. And then COVID happened. And we pivoted, and we actually took the technology that we were developing for the painting robot into a disinfecting robot. And so at this point, I think we can safely claim that we have the most effective autonomous disinfecting robot in the world. And we're obviously selling it into a critical need. And really the primary goal is to get people back into their safe places in terms of work. And so kind of where do we fit into this kind of environment? Really, if you think about the service industries and think of it as a painting company or a cleaning company, there's really this idea that robotics, they're going to integrate robotics into their work world. Well, it turns out that that's not their business, right? They're not robotic specialists. And so it's really about going in and understanding that workflow so that you can pull the different elements together to have an effective solution. And so we have expertise from the movement and navigation to the robotic arms, to the data sciences, sensors, artificial intelligence. And then when we had to bridge the gap in terms of the disinfecting side, we also have to have the ability to deal with the chemistry as well. And so, everybody knows this, but, a reason why we're doing this virtually today, the number of cases are growing astronomically around the world. The number of deaths are pretty devastating within the US as well as the worldwide. But there's also this huge economic crisis that's going around in addition to that. So business disruptions, the education system is truly a nightmare. And there's a lot of future uncertainty in terms of people are planning. And then if you take that one step further into the people who are managing large facilities, it's almost a completely unknown territory right now for them. And people are wondering how and when do we get people back to work? Kind of the thing that layers on top of this is that this is not our last pandemic. The next pandemic is actually already blooming around the world. And if you do some searches, I'm sure you can find a few very strong candidates. And I'd say Russian bird flu is probably the one that I'm betting on in terms of next. But there's been a 30-fold increase in pandemics since 1990 in the US. And so everybody knows that the next thing is on the horizon. So how do we create safety in terms of the places that people need to be? And that's really been what our focus has been. So with the pivot in March of last year, we really drove towards this disinfecting of large public spaces. And this is our initial product. And it was Breezy, we named it Breezy One. It's highly efficient, so we can do actually over 100,000 square feet. And our target was less than an hour, and we're doing it well under an hour. And so now a single robot can do several 100,000 square feet on a single charge. And I'll give you an example in terms of this, because we were very lucky, especially for a New Mexico company, because often you don't have customers in the state. Well, our first customer was the ABQ Sunport. And so we were able to work with them, and we have 4 robots deployed at the Sunport now, disinfecting the entire space every single night. And we do it in less than 40 minutes. So, and when we go through and do our testing afterwards, it's cleaner than an A+ restaurant anywhere else in the state. So you can feel safe in terms of entering the airport. What was really great about that experience is that we got to work very tightly with the custodial staff of the airport and the leadership in terms of designing the robot. And so I had to build in the flexibility of, hey, how do you work and do this disinfecting around people? We also were pretty fortunate, I think, in that Our MVP product, which you see there in the picture, actually was deployed and actually commercialized from the get-go. So we had revenues coming in while we were actually designing the build for production units that are now being deployed. We worked with Sandia in terms of a chemistry side, and they used a disinfectant that was developed at Sandia that gives us a 6-log kill, which is really important for lots of different reasons. We can talk about it. But what's interesting there is that when we go back in and we test, we're actually able to show that we're virtually limited everything below measurement sides. We've got, because of the development for this at Sandia, we've got unbelievable reams of testing data that accompanies this. And so we have data that shows that there's a protection layer for 21 days. But we also get broad penetration. So it gets under surfaces, it gets around the backside of handles, it gets into around fixtures, and it's ready for business within a couple hours. The competitive landscape is pretty interesting for us in that if you try to buy a fogger right now, you're going to be on a waiting list. And at the beginning parts of the pandemic, you virtually wouldn't even get a return phone call. So that's what's our competitive space now, is people who are doing nothing, but then once there's an event, they go in and they fog the space. And that's been pretty interesting in terms of. Then you see, and when I classify, and this is a little bit cruel of mine, but the UV robots, which are virtually toys because you can't do a large space effectively in a timeline. And we've been competing head to head with them and our different customers, and they can't do the disinfecting at the level that you want. They also can't do with shadows. So think of a carpet as a mountain range for UV rays. The backside of handles can't be done. It's kind of the things that you can touch. And there's also nothing left that's actually protecting the surface after it goes. The other competitive space is really this kind of vaporized hydrogen peroxide. And this is a very effective disinfectant, but the problem is it stays in the air for 24 hours, so you can't use it on a routine basis. And so we came up with something that worked in between that, where we have an ability to move into the space pretty quickly, but you also are taking out the toxics out of the air. So our target has been airports, factories and warehouses and schools. And what's been really interesting there is that the factories and warehouses have been a little bit slower, even though that we're in a number of factories around the country, including the 4th largest factory in the US. But it's slower because people are thinking, hey, this COVID thing is going to go away. Doesn't seem to be going away, and they're actually still spending weekly dollars. Airports are trying to convince folks to get back into the spaces. And so really being able to spray those or fog those airports has been a real boon for us. And so you'll see a number of announcements over the next few months in terms of airports that we're going into, some of the largest within the country. And then school systems is kind of the place that we were a little bit leery about going because of kind of time lags in terms of being able to put the system in and actually get the approval from the school boards and the funding cycles. It's turned out that that's actually changed quite dramatically with kind of COVID and kind of the desperation of getting people back into schools. And so we've made real headway in terms of school systems within the Texas and Arkansas side. And if you're ever interested, I have great videos of this being run in different areas and kind of proving that out. So I think really over the next year, we'll see our largest growth within the schools and the airports. I think a fundamental lesson for particularly New Mexico companies and New Mexico entrepreneurs is, how do you find that local company or local business where you're doing that work so you can actually test it on a daily basis? The Sunport has been phenomenal, and I give a big shout out to Nika Allen, the director of the airport, who's really kind of built a culture of innovation across an airport, which is not typically an environment that you see in innovation, but all the way through the custodial staff. And I could show you have testimonials there from the custodial staff as well, is that they've been really thankful about the robotics coming into the airport to help them be in a safer environment. And so that's been a really huge plus for us. But I want you to think about that and put that in a capsule, because that's really important. We've been able to work with work crews to get them to embrace robotics, right? Usually there's a pushback against robotics, but because we focused on the safety of the workers, that was the ability to be able to change that conversation in a different way. And they saw it as a tool in which to make their work lives better and safer. The marketplace is substantial in terms of for the large spaces. And I show Lowe's as just an example of, hey, there's 100,000 square feet, needs to be disinfected each night and in between different spaces. We're actually in the process of working with an outside organization that you all know and love. But I guess I'm not supposed to say it in public, in terms of working on a measurement robot. And that is actually to be able to go into spaces that will allow us to determine whether the space is safe after there's been an event or after there's been a terrorist event. And so being able to think about that in terms of the measurement robot. The other side is in terms of what's next is we've got a number of different partnerships, and I'll show that on the next map, but really in terms of what do we do as our Breezy 3, and there's all kinds of different things that we're doing there. But think about the capability. We're running a robot into the airport. I'm assuming most people in this call has been through the Sunport. We were able to map the entire airport first time in less than 3.5 hours. That's knowing where every wall, window, door, garbage can, seat, pillar, post is, and being able to know exactly where that is. And so that when the robot's navigating its way through that space, it actually is able to take that data and be able to, if something has moved and changed, it knows how to figure out a pathway around it. Pretty critical in terms of kind of what's next in terms of what we're doing, because there's lots of things that you could add on to that layer. But you think about it in terms of our target customer is really the facility manager. And now we're able to give them a geolocated map in terms of what's happening, where, when, and how, whether it's disinfecting or whether it's people flow or whether it's even temperature flow in terms of the areas. So very powerful platform that has allowed for a lot of collaborations that are in process. So if you look and think about this ecosystem, there's a disinfectant side. Prior to COVID, disinfectant was kind of the discarded element within the chemistry side. And the question was, how do you make a disinfectant that's safe, able to be around people, and also to get it disseminated quickly? The fogging side, as I told you, the foggers were not readily available at the beginning of COVID. And we worked with a company called Createch, redesigned their fogger and made it to a low power, but also battery powered, because we're doing this off of a battery powered system as we went. We had our own mobility platform, but we partnered with a company called Fetch. And the reason being is it got us the safety certifications right away, because we had to get product into the market quickly. And that's been a really nice partnership. And then I'll take you down in terms of the service companies. That's how we scale. So working with the service companies that are around the country and around the world is our avenue. So then we end up training the trainers in terms of the deployments. And so in addition to the schools and the airports, we're working with folks that are working within the military and kind of the embassies and the State Department offices. And that's a whole another area that we can go into if there's questions. Got a really strong team, but what's nice is that we've been around for a while and we've worked with each other and other successful startups in the past. And so been able to have a nice bridge work there in terms of building and trust on each other. And everybody has responsibilities, but think about it from March of last year, by the end of last year, we had $800,000 in sales. Will do that more than almost double that in the first quarter of this year. So we've got nice traction in terms of a startup side. We're building a nice portfolio in terms of IP, and we have a nice product roadmap. So with that, I'll take questions wherever you want to go.
All right, thanks, Matt. So I will, hand this over to our sharks.
So Matt, sorry. Thanks for the presentation. how do you measure the effectiveness? I mean, I'm sure there must
Yes.
be other standards, because it seems like to me the hard challenge for you is, hey, this is a big capex and some opex expense for a reward that is somewhat ethereal. I mean, yes, you can say the bacteria or whatever have been reduced, but is it really benefiting is the sun port really doing less spreading, or is it and so on? How do you show that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Frank. So let's go initially to think about what places have to do. They have to allow their communication to be clean so that they're telling people, hey, this is what we're doing to make the space as safe as possible. Doesn't answer your question directly, but I'll tell you on the other side is they put up at the airport, there's a kiosk. And as you go through the airport, you'll run by our robot with a continuous running loop of the video at night, so that they're communicating to their patrons as well as their employees during the day of what they're doing to make that space safe. So there's a little bit of it is the theater side of it in terms of, hey, what are we doing to make that safe? And so that even includes robots going out during the day and disinfecting the bathrooms. This next side is what we're doing is kind of the biological testing side of, hey, have you taken down the bacterial count? Have you taken down the viral load? And so, what we've been using is kind of the surrogate for viruses, and we're doing ATP testing. So we're actually able to measure the background bacteria and being able to show that we've completely eliminated below the detectable limits, the bacteria. Which we also know from the EPA testing is that we're also taking the viruses in that manner. So we have the empirical proof there as well. And then finally, what we're doing with the other group is we're working on what are the next level protocols that you'll have there. And what's interesting is it's reducing absenteeism, and it's reducing absenteeism even beyond the COVID side, because there's engagement in the work because they feel safe, like they're being safe. But we're also eliminating the pathogens that are allowing them to be sick. And so our pitch to the schools are actually school systems get reimbursed by student attendance. And so there is a big incentive within school systems to have their kids be healthy and to keep them healthy. And so we can show that we're reducing kind of that transmission side by the lowering of the absenteeism. But that's, that's going to take a couple of years of what you'll be able to do it. But that's the metric that we're working on.
And is this a razor and blade model where you sell a robot, but you also sell the chemicals, or do other people in your ecosystem, that slide before, do they just go direct?
It's a good question. So we are not a chemical company, and hence why it's in this section versus the life science side. What we do is work with a number of different chemistries, and we allow the customers choose the chemistry. Now we've worked out some deals with different chemical companies so that they can get it at a cost point that's makes it effective for them.
But you don't get in the middle of that transaction. You recommend it.
We try not to, meaning as much as we possibly can, we're passing that on to the chemical company. And what's interesting is the chemical companies are coming to us and saying, hey, we've got these potential customers. So it's works out well. Turns out the chemical side around disinfectants is a relatively low margin business. And so it's not actually as attractive, and we don't want the liability piece of that as well. So being able to hand that off back to the chemical company is where we want to be.